This story is titled, Sister and Her Kids Live at My House for Free, but then she calls cops on my wife, and they take her with overnight bag and sister laugh out loud. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Alright, so I don't even know how to start this without sounding like a complete jerk. But here goes. I'm 32 years old, and for the past 6 years, my sister has been living with me. I guess you could say it was one of those situations where I wanted to do the right thing as the older brother, and it just spiraled from there. A bit of context, my sister, let's call her Jess, got pregnant when she was 19. I don't need to go into all the details, but it wasn't a good situation. She didn't have a lot of support at the time, and my mom, who raised us both as a single parent, wasn't in the best place financially or emotionally to help her either. So being the big brother, I said, come stay with me. At the time, it didn't feel like a big deal. I had just bought a small house, nothing fancy, just a 3-bedroom, 1-bath kind of place. But it was mine. I had saved up for years to get that house, and I was proud of it. It felt like a solid foundation, you know. Jess was only supposed to stay for a few months while she got her life sorted out. I even helped her with the baby at night sometimes, and made space for her to feel comfortable. The thing is, a few months turned into a year, then another year, then 6 years. To be fair, Jess wasn't completely useless. She kept her area of the house clean, mostly, and when her first kid got older, she helped with little things like groceries or cleaning up the shared spaces, but she never paid rent. Not once. I didn't ask her to either, because at first I didn't want to be that guy. I felt bad asking her for money when I knew she was struggling as a single mom. Over the years, though, things got comfortable for her. She had a second kid while living here. Don't ask me about the dad situation because that's a whole other story. And suddenly what started as a place to crash became her entire life. My house was her house. Her boys, my nephews, grew up thinking of it as their home. I guess part of me let it go on because I felt like I owed her something. Jess and I didn't have the easiest childhood. My mom did her best, but we grew up pretty broke. And I always promised myself I'd be better. That I'd be the kind of guy who helped his family when they needed it. And honestly, I like my nephews. They're good kids, even if they're loud as hell and constantly making messes in the yard. Then, about 4 years ago, I met Amy. She's now my wife, and honestly, she's amazing. We clicked right away, and she's been nothing but understanding about the whole Jess situation. For the first couple of years, Amy didn't say much about my sister living here. She'd make little comments sometimes, like, when do you think Jess will get her own place? But she was patient because she knew it was complicated. Things started to change when Amy moved in last year. I mean, I get it. It's not easy to move into a house where another woman and her 2 kids are already living. Jess and Amy were civil at first, but there was always this unspoken tension. Amy felt like she couldn't make the house hers because Jess had already staked out her little territory. So here's where things started to go sideways. Amy has always been into gardening. It's her thing. She grew up helping her grandma in the garden and has always talked about how much peace it brings her. For the last year, since moving in, she's been itching to start her own little project. One night a few weeks ago, after dinner, we were sitting around talking about the house. Amy brought up how she wanted to tear up part of the front yard and plant a garden that would bloom in the spring. She already had this whole vision. Flowers, some small shrubs, and even a little bench where we could sit together. Honestly, it sounded nice. Our yard is nothing special. It's just grass and a couple of sad bushes. I figured a garden would make the place look better, and since Amy was so excited about it, I didn't see a reason to say no. We talked about hiring contractors to do the initial work, tearing up the grass, prepping the soil, and laying out the space. Amy wanted to take a few days off work to supervise and make sure it was done exactly how she pictured it. I thought it was a solid plan and told her to go for it. Now here's the thing. In hindsight, I totally get where I screwed up. I should have told Jess about the plan. I mean, yes, it's my house, and I don't technically owe her an explanation for what I do with it. But at the same time, Jess has been living here for 6 years, and her kids do play in that part of the yard all the time. Even if it's not her space in the legal sense, it's been a part of her daily routine for so long that I probably should have given her a heads up. The problem is that Amy and I have such weird schedules that we barely saw Jess that week. She's usually around during the day when I'm at work, and by the time I get home, the boys are in bed, and Jess is winding down. I didn't think it was urgent to mention the garden because I honestly thought she wouldn't care that much. Looking back, that was a dumb assumption. So fast forward to the day the contractors were scheduled to come. Amy had taken the day off to handle it. I was at work, like usual, and I had no idea what was about to go down. The contractors showed up bright and early and started ripping up the front yard. Amy was out there with them, making sure everything was being done right. From what Amy told me later, it was fine at first. She said good morning to Jess, who barely looked at her, and then went about her business. But then Jess noticed what was actually happening. She saw the workers tearing up the grass where her kids play every day, and apparently she lost it. Amy told me the yelling started out of nowhere. Jess came storming out of the house in her pajamas, demanding to know what was going on. She accused Amy of ruining the yard and taking away the only place her kids have to play. Amy tried to explain that she and I had already discussed it, but Jess wasn't having it. From what Amy described, Jess was screaming. She started yelling at the contractors to stop their work and told them they didn't have permission to touch anything. Amy stepped in and said, "Actually, you don't get to make that call. This is our house." Jess fired back with something like, "I've lived here for 6 years. It's my home too, and you don't get to come in here and tear it apart." At that point, things got really out of hand. Apparently our neighbor, let's call her Karen, because, well, you'll see, heard the yelling and decided to insert herself into the situation. Karen and Jess are pretty friendly. Her kids play with my nephews sometimes, and they've bonded over being single moms. From what Amy told me later, Karen came over and immediately took Jess's side, asking Amy what the workers were doing and why Jess didn't know about it. Amy tried to stay calm, but Karen wasn't listening. She ended up calling the police. Yeah, the police. I still can't believe it when I think about it. Karen called 911 and said there were unauthorized workers on the property tearing up the yard. She claimed Amy wasn't allowed to make changes because the owner wasn't home. The cops showed up pretty quickly, because I guess in a quiet neighborhood like ours, they have nothing better to do. And things got even more ridiculous. Amy tried to explain that she did have permission because this is her home too, and we're married. But because I wasn't there to confirm anything, the cops told Amy she needed to leave for the night. They let her grab an overnight bag, and then they literally escorted her out of our house. When I found out about all this, I was at work and completely unreachable. I work in a warehouse, so I don't have my phone on me during shifts. I didn't even know any of this had happened until I checked my phone on break and saw about a dozen missed calls from Amy. I felt like an absolute idiot. I left work early, jumped in my car, and spent the whole hour-long drive home just trying to process what the hell was happening. When I got home that night, I felt like my brain was short-circuiting. I walked into the house, and the first thing I saw was Jess sitting on the couch, completely calm, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, Amy wasn't even there. My wife, had been kicked out of her own home, and my sister was acting like she was the victim. "Where's Amy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jess looked up, all innocent. "She left," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. The cops told her she had to. Her tone set me off immediately. I wasn't yelling yet, but I was close. "Why did you call the police on her, Jess? What the hell is going on here?" That's when she jumped into her story, all defensive. According to her, she had no choice. Amy and the workers were tearing up her kids' play space without telling her, and she had to do something about it. She kept talking about how she's lived here for 6 years, and how Amy came in and started changing everything without even respecting her. "You don't get it," Jess said. "This has been my home too for years. You don't just get to rip up the yard without telling me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My sister, who's lived here rent-free, who I've supported for years, was talking like she had some kind of equal ownership over my house. "Your home?" I said. "Jess, this isn't your house. You've been living here because I let you. I've helped you out for years, and you repay me by getting the police involved and having my wife kicked out?" That's when she pulled the victim card. She started crying, talking about how much the yard meant to her kids and how they don't have anywhere else to play. I wasn't unsympathetic. I love my nephews. But the way she handled this was unacceptable. "You screamed at Amy," I said, my voice raising a little now. "You embarrassed her in front of the workers, dragged the neighbor into it, and called the police. Who does that?" Jess stood up and started yelling back, like she was trying to match my energy. "You and Amy didn't even tell me. I had to find out when strangers were digging up the yard. You don't just get to change everything without talking to me first. I've lived here for 6 years. I have a say in this." I stopped. I actually stopped mid-sentence because what she said was so insane to me. "You have a say? Jess, you don't pay rent. You don't own this house. You've been living here because I've been helping you out. That doesn't mean you get to call the shots. And then she said it. The line that made my blood boil. Period. I have tenants' rights. You can't just do whatever you want anymore. I froze. What did you just say? Jess crossed her arms and said it again. Quieter but firmer this time. I have tenants' rights. I've lived here for 6 years. You can't just kick me out or change things without notice. Legally, I have rights too. At this point, I had to walk away. I couldn't even look at her. I went outside and sat on the porch trying to calm down. I could feel my hands shaking. Not out of fear, but because I was so angry. Amy called me while I was out there. She'd been staying with her sister, and I could hear how upset she was. I can't believe your sister did that to me, she said, her voice cracking. I'm your wife, and the police made me leave our house. Hearing how hurt she was made me even angrier. I promised her I'd handle it. This is the last straw, Amy, I told her. Jess has to go. I went back inside after a while. Jess was still sitting there, acting like nothing had happened. I didn't sugarcoat it this time. You need to move out, I told her. She looked up at me, shocked. What? Kicking me out? Over a garden? No, I said. I'm kicking you out because of how you treated Amy. I'm kicking you out because you think you have more of a right to this house than my wife does. This is my home, Jess. And you crossed a line. She started crying again, telling me I was being unfair, that she had nowhere to go, that I was choosing Amy over my own sister. And maybe I was. But at that moment, I didn't care. I wasn't going to let her keep disrespecting my wife and acting like she owned the place. I gave her a deadline. You have until New Year's to find somewhere else. I'm serious. I'll help you pack. I'll help you find a place. But you're moving out. Jess stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. I just stood there for a minute, feeling completely drained. The next day, I called a lawyer to ask about this whole tenants' rights thing. I didn't want to get caught off guard if Jess tried to fight me on it. The lawyer said that Jess might technically have some residency rights because she's been living there for so long. But since there's no lease and she's never paid rent, it would be easy enough to evict her. I just needed to give her proper notice in writing. So that's exactly what I did. I wrote up a formal notice, printed it out, and handed it to Jess that evening. You're really doing this? She asked me, tears in her eyes. Yes, I said. It's time, Jess. I felt bad. Of course I did. She's my sister, and I love her. But this wasn't just about the yard anymore. It was about respect, boundaries, and the fact that I needed to put my wife first. That night, I texted Amy and told her everything. She came home the next morning, and when I saw how relieved she looked to be back in her own house, I knew I was doing the right thing. Jess didn't talk to either of us for the rest of the week. She stayed in her room or took the boys to her friend's house. I didn't push her, but I also didn't back down. For the first time in 6 years, I felt like I was taking back control of my home. The next few days were tense as hell. Jess didn't say a word to me, and the house felt like a war zone. She kept to her room with the boys, only coming out when she had to, probably hoping I'd change my mind if she just laid low. Amy was back home, but she was still pissed. She didn't deserve any of this. The first night back, she unpacked her overnight bag and sat on the edge of the bed, quiet. I tried to apologize, tried to tell her I was handling it, but she shook her head. I know it's not your fault, she said, but your sister humiliated me in my own home. Our home. You have to fix this. She wasn't wrong. The next morning, the neighbor, Karen, decided to stir the pot even more. I was outside grabbing the mail when she came walking over like nothing had happened. She had that fake smile plastered on her face, the one people wear when they're about to say something condescending. Hey, I just wanted to check in on Jess, Karen said, leaning against the mailbox like she owned the place. She told me everything that happened, and I just feel terrible for her. It's not easy for single moms, you know? I stared at her for a second, trying to keep my cool. Karen, I'm going to stop you right there. This isn't your business. What happened here is between me, my wife, and my sister. Karen blinked, like she couldn't believe I'd actually said it. Well, I'm just looking out for her. And you know, she does have rights, legally. She's lived here for... Stop! I cut her off. You called the police on my wife, Karen. Do you have any idea how messed up that is? Amy lives here. She's my wife. You had no right to get involved. Karen raised her hands defensively. I didn't know she was authorized to make those changes. That's exactly the point, I shot back. It's not your problem. You don't live here, and you don't get to decide what happens on my property. At that, her smile vanished, and she got this sour look on her face. Well, I guess I'll stay out of it then, she said, her voice dripping with attitude. But just so you know, Jess doesn't deserve to be thrown out over a garden. I didn't bother responding. I turned around, went back inside, and locked the door behind me. I was done being polite. Later that afternoon, I sat Jess down for another conversation because clearly she still didn't get it. I found her in the living room, folding laundry while the boys played video games. I could tell she was avoiding me, but I wasn't going to let this drag out any longer. "Jess," I said, sitting across from her, "we need to talk." She didn't look up. "I already know what you're going to say." "Good," I replied. "Then this won't take long." I handed her the formal written notice I had printed out earlier. It was basically a repeat of what I'd said before. She had 60 days to move out, and I would help her find a place if she needed it. Jess finally looked up at me, her face red. "You're really serious about this?" "Yes, I am." She let out this bitter laugh. "Unbelievable. You're really throwing me and my kids out over some stupid grass. Do you even hear yourself?" "This isn't about the grass, Jess," I said, trying to stay calm. "This is about how you handled the situation. You screamed at Amy. You embarrassed her. And then you let the neighbor get involved and called the cops. You crossed a line, and you know it." She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "Where are we supposed to go? Huh? You think it's easy finding a place when you've got 2 kids and no money? You promised you'd always be there for me. And that hurt. I won't lie. It hit me hard because it's true. I did promise I'd be there for her. But 6 years is a long time, and I realized that my help had turned into something toxic. I had given her a crutch, and now she expected me to carry her forever. "I have been there for you," I said quietly. "For 6 years, Jess. I've given you a place to live. I've helped with the boys, and I never asked for anything in return. But it's time for you to figure things out. You can't live here forever." She didn't say anything. She just sat there, crying softly. For a second, I almost felt guilty. Almost. But then I remembered how Amy had looked when she came home. How humiliated she'd felt when the police made her leave her own house. That's when I knew I was doing the right thing. That night, Amy and I sat on the couch and talked about everything. I told her about Karen's little visit and how I'd shut her down. I also told her about Jess crying and how hard it was to stick to my decision. Amy put her hand on mine. "I know it's hard," she said, "but you're doing the right thing. I love you, but I can't live in a house where your sister treats me like I don't belong. This is our home, and she needs to respect that." She was right. Over the next few days, Jess started coming out of her room more, but we didn't talk much. She avoided Amy completely, which was probably for the best. I heard her on the phone with some friends a couple of times, and I think she's trying to figure out where she's going to go. I even overheard her talking to Karen once, complaining about how heartless I was being. I didn't care. I was sticking to my guns. The neighbor issue was the final straw for me. I made it clear to Karen, through a text, that she was no longer welcome on my property. I told her that if she came over again, I'd consider it trespassing and would call the police myself. She didn't reply, but I haven't seen her since. Good riddance. As for Jess, the tension is still thick. She's quiet and the house feels awkward, but I'm counting down the days. I gave her 60 days to move out, and I meant it. I love my sister, but this is my home. Amy and I deserve to live here in peace. At this point, I was sticking to my guns. Jess had her 60-day notice in writing, and Amy and I were trying to move forward with as little drama as possible. But because nothing in this situation could ever be easy, Jess decided to push back. A few days after I handed her the notice, she dropped a bomb on me. She'd been talking to a friend of hers, and apparently, that friend knew someone who worked in law, whatever the hell that meant. Jess sat me down and told me, very smugly, that she wasn't going anywhere unless I followed the proper eviction process. "You can't just hand me a piece of paper and expect me to pack up my kids and leave," she said, crossing her arms. "I've looked into it. I have rights." I tried to stay calm. "Jess, what are you even talking about? You're living here for free. There's no lease, no rent payments, nothing. I gave you 60 days out of courtesy." She shook her head. "Doesn't matter. I've been here for over 6 years. That makes me a tenant. Legally, you have to file for eviction. You can't just kick me out because your wife doesn't like me." I couldn't believe this was happening. My sister, who I'd taken in for free, supported, and given a home to, was now talking about tenants' rights like she'd been some kind of paying renter this whole time. I didn't know what to say, so I just walked away. I needed a minute to cool down and figure out my next move. The next day, I called my lawyer again. I explained what Jess had said and asked if she was right. Turns out, in a lot of places, someone who's lived in a house for a long time, even if they don't pay rent, can establish residency rights. It's a gray area, but technically, I would need to go through a formal eviction process to get her out if she refused to leave voluntarily. "You're kidding me," I said to the lawyer. He wasn't kidding. He told me the good news was that Jess didn't have much of a legal leg to stand on, since there's no lease agreement or rental payments. But the bad news was that the formal process would take longer than I'd like. I couldn't just change the locks and throw her stuff out. That would be illegal. I had to do this by the book. So that's what I decided to do. The next evening, I sat Jess down again, this time with a printout of the legal eviction notice I'd filed. I explained to her, calmly but firmly, that I wasn't backing down. She was leaving. I was giving her the time required by law, and I would help her pack and find resources for single moms if she needed them. But this wasn't up for debate. She scoffed at me. You'd really go through all this? Legal eviction? Against your own sister? Jess, you made this choice when you called the police on my wife and refused to take responsibility for it, I said. I'm not the bad guy here. You're the one who crossed a line. I've been more than generous with you, and you know it. She didn't respond. She just glared at me like I was the devil and stormed off again. For the next couple of weeks, the house felt unbearable. Amy and I tried to keep to ourselves as much as possible, but there was this constant tension in the air. Jess would barely look at us, but I'd hear her on the phone at night talking to friends about how cruel I was being. One day, she muttered loud enough for me to hear, "I guess family doesn't mean anything anymore." It stung. I'm not going to lie, it really hurt hearing her say that. I started second-guessing myself. Was I being too harsh? Was I really the bad guy for kicking out my sister and her kids? But then I'd think about Amy, about how she had to pack an overnight bag and leave her own house because of Jess's outburst, and I'd remember why I was doing this. This wasn't just about a garden anymore. It was about respect and boundaries. Two things Jess clearly didn't understand. Amy, to her credit, was incredibly patient during all of this. I think part of her knew how hard it was for me to kick my sister out, even if it was the right thing to do. One night, we were sitting on the couch, and I just let out this huge sigh. I feel like the worst brother in the world, I admitted. Amy turned to me and grabbed my hand. You're not. You gave Jess 6 years of your life. You helped her when no one else would. But it's not your responsibility to carry her forever. And it's not fair for her to treat you like this. Or me. She was right, and I knew it. But that didn't make it easier. As the weeks ticked by, Jess didn't make any real effort to pack or look for a new place. I knew she was dragging her feet, hoping I'd cave and let her stay. I even overheard her tell one of her friends, "He's bluffing. He won't actually go through with it." It pissed me off. I didn't want to escalate things, but I wasn't bluffing. I started looking into options to help her move faster, talking to social services about resources for single moms, reaching out to a few friends who might know of apartments for rent, and even offering to help her with a deposit if she found a place. I left a list of resources on the kitchen counter one day and texted her, "Here are some options to help you and the boys move forward. I'm serious about the deadline, Jess." She didn't reply, but I noticed later that the list was gone. By the end of the month, things were starting to shift. Jess finally started packing up small things. Clothes, toys, some of her kids' books. I didn't say anything about it. I figured if she was finally coming to terms with leaving, I'd give her space. One evening, she actually came into the living room while Amy and I were watching TV. She stood there awkwardly for a minute before speaking. "Are you really okay with this? Me leaving like this?" I looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger. I felt tired. "Jess, I love you. You're my sister. But this can't keep going on. It's time for you to start fresh and figure things out on your own. I'll help you as much as I can, but you can't live here forever." She didn't argue. She just nodded and walked away. By the time we hit the 60-day mark, Jess was mostly packed. The boys didn't seem to understand what was happening, which made it harder. But I knew it was the right call. I helped load her boxes into her friend's car on moving day, and when she finally drove off, the house felt quieter than it had in years. I feel bad for my nephews, but my sister's been living here for free for 6 years. I didn't sign up to be their permanent landlord. I guess I just want to know, am I the a-hole for finally telling her to leave?